Turn it on, I'm very thirsty. Nice job, Chris.
These are my favorite and not so favorite metal albums of February, and we are starting with Retromorphosis with Psalmus Mortis. So yeah, first up on my favorites list, this is made up largely of current and former members of Spawn of Possession, Obscura, and Necrophagist, as well as Decrepit Birth, and it's just as dizzyingly technical as you would imagine with that lineup. It's clear why it came so highly recommended in the comments. Better yet, great melding of these performances into chillingly memorable atmospheres and all-around good pacing that makes this so much more than your boilerplate tech death release. Tracks like Never to Awake and The Tree really keep you on your toes, keeping the experience fresh the deeper you get in. I do think that the vocals could be a little bit more interesting to match the dynamics of everything else, but otherwise top-notch stuff. Next up is Mantar with Post-Apocalyptic Depression. I've been a fan of this German sludge duo for over a decade now, and ever since seeing them perform live around 2016, they are the closest I feel like you can get to seeing something like Helmet or Bleach-era Nirvana in the 90s these days. This fifth album continues that metal meets grunge and noise energy with more rebelliously raw anthems like Principle of Command, Rex Perverso, and Hausgericht. I also love just how close they come to capturing their live sound with those ever-pounding drums and guitar tone, like they translated Iggy Pop's persona into distortion. Just a foot tap and head bob inducing good time that you could probably recommend as a gateway to non-metalheads as well. Then there's Grima with Nightside. Album 6 for this Siberian atmospheric black metal group. Really dig these synths, largely leaning into that simulated accordion sound, giving a more unique folk tinge to the music. And while there is plenty familiar when it comes to the guitars, they also deviate enough stylistically so as to stand apart from the droves of other black metal bands out there. Another colossal sounding album that's easy to get wrapped up in and manages to justify some of its longer runtimes with earworm hooks and shifting textures. I'm particularly impressed with Impending Death Premonition, Flight of the Silver Storm, and The Nightside. Then we have Sidewinder with March of the Eternal Heretic. This relatively new UK thrash and hardcore crew bringing a ferocious 4-song EP in the wake of their first full-length. With the loss of Power Trip, at least for the time being, there has been a very specific hole waiting to be filled by another equally rebellious and nihilistic sounding crew, and I feel like Sidewinder could be another contender. They too have that dark and venomous touch to songwriting and kind of 90s death metal approach to production that just adds up to something so much more malevolent sounding than 99% of non-Blackened thrash acts out there today. Add some very anthemic gang vocals about burning society to the ground and it's a recipe for a damn good time. Then we have Serenity and Murder with Timeless Reverie. Album 5 for this incredibly underrated melodic death metal band out of Japan. I've been in love with their music since 2015's The Highest of Dystopia, and they have only matured further with each album. Their particular mix of uplifting riffs with synths and symphonic elements should particularly appeal to fans of Mors Principium Est, Dark Tranquillity, and Calma. This album also sees the band expanding on the melodic elements with some sparing use of clean vocals on the likes of Revolt, while still bringing the heavy hooks on rippers like Never Defile. Other favorites here include Matrix, Blue Roses, Gracefully Fall, and A Dance of Sorrow. Before we get to the next pick, just a reminder to hit the like button if you're enjoying the video, and be sure to share your own favorites from the month down in the comments. But next up we have Open Kasket with Trials of Failure. Super heavy debut full length from this little rock death metal band with plenty of hardcore influence in its DNA as well. Lots of slammy riffs and punishing vocals to really inspire as much violence in the pit as possible. Frankly, every note feels fine-tuned specifically for a live audience to cause as much damage as possible with tracks like Putrid Existence. Lots of solid guest spots too, with the likes of Backbiter and Terminal Nation. Really, there's not much more I feel I need to say, just let the clips speak for themselves on this one. It's a vicious powerhouse with breakdowns that actually left a crater in my sternum. Then we have 16 with Guides for the Misguided. This LA group has been cooking up their own trademark take on sludge since 1991, and somehow 35 years later they still sound as fresh as ever. From pure metal ragers like After All to the haunting croon of Blood Atonement Blues and Proudly Damned, this is more grimy dirtbag music best performed by flaming garbage can under a filthy bridge. And the guitars absolutely wail on this album with so much triumphant scorn as to render the vocals almost unnecessary. If you're not specifically familiar with this group, they should appeal to fans of groups like I Hate God, Acid Bath, and Crowbar. Then we have Abduction with Existentialismus. Another hardworking black metal project that, despite just forming in 2016, has already now put out 5 full-length albums as well as a demo, 2 EPs, and a split.
Show-offs.
This new record continues the trend of channeling a classic darkness just dripping with ritualistic atmosphere and haunting energy. Tracks feel a little longer than warranted at times, but when there's only 6 of them, the investment feels a bit more worthwhile, and there's enough dynamic variety to make each distinct. I particularly enjoy the very Shamash sounding Truth is as Sharp a Sword as Vengeance, and that is a very difficult title to say. But next up we have Jinjer with Duel. While I did enjoy this Ukrainian groove metal band's previous release Wallflowers, I felt like it fell short of album Micro before that. This one feels like it combines the best qualities of both while still progressing in their performance and songwriting. Plenty of absolute banger tracks here like Tantrum and Rogue, but also more earworm melodic fare like Green Serpent. Absolutely love those little falsetto parts on that one, and as usual, excellent playing all around, but drummer Vlad often stealing the show on the kit. Honestly, I see people in my comments hating on this band, and I think that it's unwarranted. Goofy name and some of the cringier fanbase aside, give them a fair shot. Next up is Sacrifice with Volume 6. In case you hadn't figured it out from the title, this is the 6th album from this Canadian thrash metal band, and also their first in 16 years. Another album that absolutely kicks the door down right from the start with the raging Blackened riffs of Comatose. They bring the full package for me right down to the harsher vocals just the way I like them. Some really chunky groove metal hooks in here as well, raising comparisons to Lamb of God on the likes of Antidote of Poison. And the more it goes on, the more dynamic and textured things go beyond the pure headbanging energy. Then we have Délirant with Thoughteater. The perfect title for this sophomore effort from this Spanish black metal crew whose name already translates to delirious. This truly is a brain-sucking black hole of an album that pulls you into a hypnotic state only to devour your very essence from the inside out. Notes here certainly to the likes of Deathspell Omega and Leviathan. Above all else, the words haunting and serpent-like come to mind. Feels more like an October-appropriate release in many ways, but with how cold and gray it's been here, I suppose it's still appropriate. Then there's Darko with Dethmask 3.
I'm sorry, try again.
Well shit, as if the month wasn't packed enough already, one of my favorite deathcore projects, Ninja, drops their latest EP. After being a little disappointed with the increasingly melodic turn of the last LP though, this was a welcome return to the super heavy, syncopated rhythmic violence that brought me to them to begin with. I honestly have no idea how they managed to put out so much quality content at this assembly line rate year after year. I hear they're even already like putting out another EP and working on the next LP.
It's too much! It's too much!
But favorite tracks on this one, Mallet Pulse, Supra, Bloodhost, and respect for that The Substance sample on Have You Ever. You need to go see that movie. Next up is Crossbringer with Healismus Aeternus. Is it just me or are there a lot of Latin titles this month? Anyways, I'd describe Russian band Crossbringer as Post-Black's answer to Ulcerate, but you could also draw some more direct comparisons to likes of Celeste, Oathbreaker, and Hexus. Snarl-tinged post-hardcore screams are belted over massive guitars and pounding drums that alternate between technical torrents of chaos and waves of sludgy melancholy. The phrase that comes to mind for this one is awe-inducing, as both of those modes frequently left me in stunned silence, and by the end, a strange sort of zen state. Maybe it's silly, but the best way I can describe the feeling is staring down a literal apocalypse and finding a deep sense of peace in the end. Then we have Dream Theater with Parasomnia. I was never a big fan of these guys growing up, but I have to say I feel like they've been only getting better over the last few albums. The songwriting remains complex while getting tighter, and of course it's great to see Mike Portnoy back on the kit, killing it on drums. Lots of great moments here, especially the opener Midnight Messiah and Night Terror.
Midnight Messiah.
Amazing riffs, ripping solos, and yet more incredible synth work from the man Jordan Rudess. I don't love it as much as the last album, actually, start to finish, but prog fans rejoice for an album I actually put pretty high in my discography ranking, so check that video out if you have not already. And speaking of tier lists, we also have Bleeding Through with 9. 26 years into their career, and this Orange County metalcore mainstay is somehow as pissed off as ever with this album. So many great tracks here, full aggression on opener, Gallows calling back to the heyday of their career. Same goes for the evil-sounding Our Brand is Chaos, and both Dead But So Alive and Path of Our Disease utilize some very effective additional vocals from Marta. Shockingly good stuff. They bring all the violence and atmosphere in equal parts that made me fall in love with them to begin with. Also gotta give apologies to All That Remains for last month's video. I did not expect that album to be so good, but it is shaping up to be a big year for metalcore. Then we have Obscura with A Sonication. I've enjoyed pretty much every release from this German progressive death metal band over the years, but I saw a lot of negative discussion in the lead up to this one, given another major lineup shakeup and even some controversy with former bassist Alex Weber accusing remaining member Stefan Kumerer of stealing ideas that he had presented before his exit. There was also plenty of talk about changes in sound with the release of related singles like Evenfall, but honestly, to me, this all just felt kind of on par for the course given Obscura's history. Most of the album is still on the faster and more technical side, with plenty of great songs in that vein like Silver Linings, In Solitude, and The Prolonging, as well as another Melodeathy rager in The Sun Eater. I'm in agreement with the complaints about the production. I find it very thin and tinny, but the songwriting and performances are very consistently strong and engaging. They probably don't sound as good live, but I enjoyed the album. Then we have Gone Awry with Go Back to Sleep. Gone Awry answers the question of what if Hatebreed had Slipknot riffs and big atmosphere. Full disclosure again, vocalist Rafi and I have been friends for like 17 years now? God damn, I'm getting old. But don't let that take away from the fact that I legitimately think this album is an absolute blast. Seriously, it's been so cool to watch this band evolve into what it is now. I can hear so many influences coming through from both metallic hardcore and nu metal alike, and the jump in production value here is just insane, making tracks like When It Hurts sound huge. Personal favorites though, Revisionist, Ultimatums, and Coffin Door with that killer Return of the Living Dead sample. Then we have Traitors with Phobias. The latest full-length from this Florida deathcore crew, who I can't believe initially caught my attention over 10 years ago with the slow and menacing single Arrogance. Really tight 33 minutes of pure groove and aggression, and despite keeping things fairly simple, they do a good job of differentiating tracks and keeping things interesting. It's like the approach is often largely the same, but the overall texture changes, like with the occasional hip-hop element, the full tilt gent of No Witness, and the very corn-sounding parts on Imposter. Bone-breaking stuff that really scratched an itch for me without getting too fancy while also getting creative with the breakdowns. I ended up picking up the CD for this one. Then we have Architects with the Sky, the Earth, and All Between. Believe me, I'm as surprised as you are. It's been a long time since an Architects record made one of my best of lists. I used to love this band, but after years of what felt like a constant downfall, I had started to lose hope in them. Enter this record and they are starting to turn it around for me once more. Some seriously heavy headbangers on here like Black Hole, Whiplash, and Brain Dead, but also some really infectious melodic ones like Curse and Judgment Day, bringing some Deftones and Spirit Box energy. Not everything is a winner here, but I enjoy its overall flow and look forward to spending more time with it, which is again something I cannot say about like the last 2 albums, maybe even 3. Check out the tier list for more in-depth thoughts.
Inconceivable.
Now, before I get to my favorite of the month, I have a few other notable albums to talk about that I had varying opinions on. First up, we have Scour with Gold. Now, if you ask me, this album has a bit of a side A, side B problem. The first half brings some of the most generic and recycled black metal riffing you can find to bore me to tears in spite of the breakneck blast beats, but the second half has all the more textured and interesting tracks like Hell, Invoke, and Gold. Phil Anselmo's vocals are easily the best part, offering a solid range of demented sounds. I saw some people really raving about this, but I don't know. It was okay. There's potential here. Next up is Phrenolith with Ashen Womb. Another one I saw a bunch of people hyped for with this third album from the Copenhagen death metal band. I wasn't initially impressed when I sampled it, but all the buzz made me give it another shot, and I still wasn't impressed. It's solid enough in terms of atmosphere and old school energy, but I feel like the Irish band Malthusian give me more of what I want in this particular flavor. There's also Seyor with Amidst the Ruins. I really dig this Scottish atmospheric black metal band with folk elements, and while this album has all of the usual beauty with the soaring strings and wind instruments and epic vibes, I just didn't find myself connecting with it as much for whatever reason. Love the traditional instruments and general energy, but was kind of a background music level one for me, feeling a bit dragged out. Then we have Pissgrave with Malignant Worthlessness. The purveyors of Pustulant Perversion are back with their third album of Pure Filth, but I have to say, I think that the initial shock value and charm has worn off for me, as for all of its attempted intensity, I was bored through most of this one. It's definitely still gross, but just not particularly engaging. I tried spinning it a bunch of times, seeing if it would grow, but yeah, no, it's just okay. On a similar note, we have Caustic Phlegm with Purulent Apocalypse. This debut from the solo UK death metal project has a gnarly sound that I would also compare to Pissgrave, but also with the raw sentiment of plenty of the early 90s death metal founders with that buzzsaw guitar and cavernous reverb. Songs like the Teratophilist and Flesh Melt Contagion also have this very unique, unsettling tone that was ultimately the touch that won me over to listening to it in full. The word that stood out to me in the press release was definitely primitive. I liked this one actually better than Pissgrave. It didn't make my favorites, but it's worth checking out. We also have Septic Flesh with Amphibian. Surprise EP from one of my favorite bands, though it's only 2 new tracks and 2 instrumental versions. Still, if you love symphonic death metal as much as I do, definitely give it a spin, and if you're new to them, please check out some of their other stuff. I recommend starting with The Great Mass. We also have Lacuna Coil with Sleepless Empire. I've been aware of this Italian band for a long time, and yet I just never really gave them a chance for, again, no particular reason, which is something I try to remedy these days. And while it didn't knock my socks off or anything, I enjoyed this. Christina Scabbia has an incredible voice, and as a band, they can write some really earworm songs. I do find myself wishing that the riffs were a little bit more varied and interesting, but overall this was an enjoyable, like, B- of a listen. There's also Sin of God with Bloodbound. Album 3 for this Hungarian technical death metal band with comparisons to the likes of Deicide and Nile. It's classic death metal to the bone with deep imposing vocals and plenty of double bass pedal. A little repetitive with the songwriting at times, but it's only 34 minutes and the sheer bloodlust of it kept me going. We also have Fractured Insanity with Age of Manipulation. Over 20 years from this Belgian death metal band, now with 5 albums under their belt and a sound I would put somewhere between Behemoth and Belphegor. There's room for some editing down here and there, but by and large this was a killer listen that death metal fans are going to guzzle down. Of course, we have Killswitch Engage with This Consequence. Perfectly fine album from what was once one of my favorite bands in the genre. I really liked the last one, but this one just kind of falls short both in their discography and within the realm of other metalcore so far this year, definitely. Check out the tier list I did for my thoughts on all their albums. Like, it's still enjoyable. It's far from bad, but it just, I don't know, I liked it less every time I listened to it. Then there's Faience Dream with Repose of the Soul. Pitched to me as basically the third Necrophagist album, this is largely the work of one man plus another feature of guitarist Christian Moinzer on this list, as well as Hans Grossman on drums. Pretty impressive stuff, and also maybe the happiest sounding death metal album you will hear this year. I do think that broadening the vocal performance would push this from great to incredible, but exemplary nonetheless. And then my favorite metal album of the month goes to Pathogenic with Crowned in Corpses. This Massachusetts progressive death metal band was actually first recommended to me by Justin Bonnets of Tala, of all people. But it took me a second to make the connection as their debut came out back in 2011 and the next didn't follow until 2019. So another 6-year gap later, we get this third album proving once more why I am a fan of quality over quantity. This is a delightful mix of tech death and djenty grooves that I think should be pleasing to a pretty broad spectrum of the metal community. I could probably most closely compare this to something like Born of Osiris meets Job for a Cowboy, with roots more firmly in the death metal side of that spectrum. Lots of impressive performances, good mix of ferocious singles with more expansive and progressive compositions. Must listen. Y'all check out this playlist for more of my favorite metal albums of 2025 so far, or check out this video for your personal recommendation. But that'll do it for now. Flight of Icarus signing off. I will see you in the trenches.